Our speaker tonight, Nadja Steiner, is a renowned outdoor fan and feels at home both in and on the ocean and in the mountains. She started sea kayaking about 30 years ago when she was studying oceanography in Germany at the Baltic Sea. After moving to Victoria, she became a Siska member and started taking classes here. And like so very many of us, she had to unlearn all her bad habits. The Great Bear Rainforest is one of the most amazing places to paddle. Nadja is going to present a summary of her 2022 trip from Prince Rupert to Port Hardy, and that's a long way, with her friends, a mother and daughter visiting from Germany. So, Nadja, it's all yours.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, thanks very much. That was my quick introduction. I'm almost a bit intimidated because there's like you guys are doing so many trips and are out all the time. But I do like to take pictures and I do like to share them. So I figured it's like an inspiration or a reminder of where you were or whatever, just like a little trip in your mind before you go out in the real world. This trip has been with just the three women, and Betsy, my friend from Germany, and her daughter Selma. And Betsy's family was really our paddle family. We were paddling when we were living in Germany with my husband Harry, who's sitting down there joining us. And our kids grew up together in the boats. And now I was lucky enough to have her come over and we could do this adventurous trip. So we all like charts really very much, so we spend a lot of time before in the planning phase to just sit down and go through the BC Marine Trails maps online to the Commandis books and transferred all the campsites or other important relevant parking sites onto the 4D charts or something like that we were having. So that was a little bit of tedious, but it was really useful to have that on our way. We also needed to kind of do some boat checks to start because my friends, of course, didn't have their own boats. We had boats here, so we needed to make sure that everything fit properly. And we went out into Todd Inlet and did some rescue practice and just remember that everybody knows how to roll and all these other things that you need to do occasionally or might have to do. We didn't have to, but we enjoyed it. But eventually we were ready to go and on the way to the ferry, with the ferry up to Prince Rupert. And the thing with Prince Rupert is that I've been to the Great Bear before and we ended up in Bella Bella where you can easily just kind of get off the ferry, set up your tent because you arrive in the middle of the night and then launch from there. So we figured, it'll be similar in Prince Rupert. And I did post it. I heard some laughing already. Yeah, I did post it at the Inside Passage Facebook page and to ask, is that possible? Can you do it? And I got mixed responses. Some people said, it's better you get somebody to pick you up and stay in the hotel overnight. And somebody else said, no, you can just camp there and send us even a picture with a cross. And when we arrived there, it was rather terrible. We had the day trip and arrived at 12:30 at night. And then walk to find out, first of all, it's really far to walk to launch, and you can nowhere camp. There was another family there. They actually were more organized than we were and had ordered arranged with someone to pick them up, but apparently that person forgot them, and they didn't get back either. But they were just keen enough that they just called Skina kayaking in the middle of the night, and the poor guy picked up and decided to come and help us. So he actually came, looked at the situation. There were in the end 6 people with 5 kayaks. So he went back and picked up his kayak trailer and over in the next 2 or 3 hours drove us all to Port Edward where we could launch, where we could set up our camp somewhere in between the train tracks, the Dixie toilet, and garbage can. So it was, that was the great intro for my German friends into camping in Canada. But it was a great launch point, and I mean, like by that time, I forgot to mention it, we also ended up having the classical torrential downpour that you can feel in the rainforest. So it was a bit of a rough start. We didn't get up quite that early since we only got to bed at around 4 a.m. and at 6:30 the first train zoomed by us, and it felt like it was just going through the tent. So we had a little bit of a late start. But anyway, we made it and started moving on. This is a little bit of a beginning of the trip. So we started from Port Edward, and then kind of over here we tried to get out as far. This is where we kind of had nice exposure. But we didn't want to go all the way around Banks Island. That's a bit too much exposure, and we also didn't have quite that much time. So we went down here, and then a little bit inside. This is around Finn Island, and I had to go there because my son's name is Finn, so of course I had to go to Finn Island. We went to here. This is Princess Royal, where you can sometimes see spirit bear. We didn't manage, but I was trying hard. And then continued on, and I have another map for the continuing trip. So the big problem, especially in the north, is that there is not many campsites, and we started at a time when the tides were really high, so we had a lot of high tides, which means your often really nice looking beach campsite are just flooded sometime overnight, so you really need to find something with high back. That also means that you have fairly long distances. So our unfortunate start with the being very overtired kind of got us into this starting too late in the morning, and if you're on the water too long, the wind picks up and it'll get harder, and then you get tired again. So it took us a week until we actually got out of this silly rhythm and then managed to actually get up really early, paddle during a nice time, and when the wind picked up, we were off the water. So I'm just gonna go through some pictures. I will talk a little bit, and then I just go through some pictures, and then I'll talk a little bit more, and then so on. So this is just starting. This was our first campsite. And then we just had most stops during the night. Often it was, we actually had, I was really lucky. I went to the Great Bear Rainforest twice, and I haven't seen a single bear in the Great Bear Rainforest, but I also had hardly any rain there. So this is very special, but it makes for beautiful pictures. These are our lunchtime stops at the beach. But poor Betsy, one of the first adventures there was that she had a leak in her mattress and slept very uncomfortable in addition to the rough start. So after the first night on the ground, she decided we had to do a proper fix. But that worked out fine, and she was fine for the rest of the time. Then, of course, every day, we had an inReach with us and marine radios, of course. Harry was at home, so he was our emergency backup. If we were out of marine radio weather range, we could either just go on the marine radio directly and request a marine weather forecast, or we should just message Harry and say, what's the weather forecast, where are we going? And so that was really helpful. But it also helped to just send him, and as well as Betsy's partner, an update of where we are and how things have been for us. And then, of course, we looked for the marine radio, but as I mentioned, it wasn't everywhere. In between the channel, between just east of Banks Island, there were several places where we didn't have radio reception. And then, of course, there is nice wildlife. Once we did a nice little crossing, and there was a whole group of sea lions coming there. So we stopped in the middle of the channel. There was a whale too, but once we had our cameras out, the whale didn't show up anymore. If you go down that channel, I think it's no, I forgot it. It didn't put it in. I have it somewhere, I think. There's a lot of little islands that you can actually go away from the main channel where the wind's blowing hardest, and you can hide a little bit, and then you kind of find these nice little extra tours where the waters are often calm and also fairly shallow, so you can see stuff on the ground. So that's really beautiful to look at. This is that corner I pointed out, the northwest of Macaulay Island. Principe Channel is the channel I wanted to mention. And that's one of the campsite is absolutely beautiful. But you have to be it's as many people who have done more rougher regions on my outer coast. Every time you have a little bit of an islet coming out or a headland, the waves pick up, and this is the same case here, because you're right there where you have the exposure to the open ocean. There's no island in there in between anymore, and you come around the corner, so it can get pretty rough, like it looks pretty calm there now, but we had both a rough landing and a bit of a surf start to get out of it. Unfortunately, I got a new a dry suit, which has these thing that you can, like the head gasket that you can, not head gasket, that's in a car. Like look, that you can open a bit, and you have to remind yourself that you have to actually close it before you leave. I forgot, and it was a really wet start for me, but you tend to do that only once, so that's good at least. For water, we used a gravity filter system. We have like all the water pump systems as well, and I've used them a lot in the mountains. But for the kayaking, I've just switched completely over to the gravity filtering, because you can really just arrive, go to the river, fill it up, let it work while you set up tents. You kind of have a good bunch of water, and so that works really well. This is one of the occasions, like the water, picking up water is not always the easiest. So like, of course, you look on your chart where there's a little creek, but you have no idea how it looks like, that you can actually go where the creek starts to be not salty anymore. So this was one of the occasions where there was a little bit of a challenge to clamber over rocks and logs to get water. The mornings were really like, in some ways, my favorite. Like if you start off early morning, it tends to be really calm and but also foggy. So sometimes it's just like really foggy, you don't see anything, and then it slowly starts to clear up, and it's kind of like meditation when you go there and you just kind of paddle. That's where your life satisfaction curve really goes up, and and sometimes you just hear the whales around you, and like you don't necessarily see them, but you're just going there. It's just so like calming. It's like if you were burn out from work before, that's what you need to kind of get rid of that. So we also used that opportunity to do a little bit of towing practice there, like in the calm in the morning, just to change things up. And then just kept going. And yeah, we were, of course, looking at all the things, but Selma is a mathematician, so she was quite excited to see that there's a bunch of islands that are called azimuth, sine, and cosine islands. And then, of course, you arrive, we tended to arrive with beautiful weather and sunshine, so we had many of those days where we would just kind of hang out and sunbathe in the afternoon, look a little bit what the tide washed in. Like I've seen a lot of sea cucumbers in the water, but seeing them outside is they are rather interesting to look at. The obligatory sunset and more paddling in the morning, and you see like the sun starting to come up. This is once more one of these nice little, this is still the ocean, but it kind of looks like a creek. It's super clear, it's super shallow, but that's also where you see a lot of the tidal rapids that you can see, where you can have to make sure that you're there at the right time, because if it's getting too rough, you might actually either get pushed out or can't get over, but it can look like a river essentially, even though this is still ocean. For food, we did a lot of harvesting of algae, like sea lettuce, kelp, sea asparagus. That was really nice addition to our food combinations, and I'll talk a little bit more later about that. We had some visitor, like the cranes, or they're just, I love to see them and hear them. They announce them really loudly, and you hear them, they're very characteristic sound, and then you kind of see them land, so that's really nice. Cherry Islands are just like at in that area where where I pointed out Finn Island is. There is it's just like a tiny little islet, and we had to like down Principe Channel was really getting pretty rough and pretty challenging because we ended up having a southeast wind coming in, and then you have the wind against tides, and it's getting pretty rough. So we slipped around the corner, and right around the corner, after like a pretty challenging day, there's these little cherry islets. So we made a stop there, and sometimes the camping opportunities, as I said, with the high tides, it looks really nice. You see like a little bit of shell beach. But it's all disappearing overnight, and like we had put up this tarp so we could sit there. That was just about as high as the water went, and then in that island, with difficulty, we managed to kind of scrape a little space enough to put 2 islets. It worked for us, 2 tents, so it worked for us, but with a larger group, it would have been rather difficult. And we looked at the other side, but that was not an option either. But the other nice thing in that region is that, like my son referred to it as whale soup when you go up there. So you hear whales all the time and you see them a lot too. And in this case, we paddled to our next campsite right around Finn Island. And they were just sleeping there. So like we were just sitting there, and there was this mother with calf just in the water right in front of us. And then another whale was at the side. And so we just went on, and before setting up tents on the island, we just like took our cameras and sat there and started taking pictures of whales, which was just beautiful. And then eventually things calmed down, but the whales stayed, so all night long we heard the whale snoring, I would say, almost. Which is kind of a cool thing to do, to just lay in your tent and then hear the whale like making noise all night. We then went down to North Princess Royal Island into Barnard Harbor, which we were told was also an opportunity potentially see spirit bears. But we were again there at very high tide. This was another like a bit challenging campsite to find, and it's like when you try to find campsites there, it's like a lot of places look like, oh, this is fantastic campsite. It looks like green grass, and then you step out and there's big boulders and big holes, and like it's completely impossible to put your tent up. So it's really good. Like if you have the marked campsites there, they're much more likely to succeed. We weren't very lucky in finding something beyond that, and there's not really many beaches, especially if you go in the intermediate channels. I mean, it's really nice in that overall area because there is so many options you can do: outer coast, in the middle, inside passage. So you can really hide from the weather depending on where you are. But it's also like if the channels become smaller and kind of just zoom through, there's often not very good landing sites. While on the outer coast you have beautiful beaches, but it's a bit tough to get there occasionally, or the coast in between beaches is really rough, so you can't even get out and pee, which we also experienced. So yeah, that was our little campsite there. It's just like made a little bit of flat area, and everywhere else where it's looking so nice and grassy were just like hidden boulders and holes. So you have to be really careful even just walking there, so you didn't like sprain your ankle or something. So we didn't see any bears, but we went back out in the next morning, visited this tiny little waterfall, which was rather beautiful, and then the fog cleared up and we had yet another beautiful sunny blue sky. And another one of these places where you stop for lunch and you just want to hang out because it's so beautiful. And then we went to Seja Island, and to our huge surprise, the whole little island was covered in tents. That was like an unusual experience for this region because you really don't see many people, and like Heather is here, was one of the group who was there. I didn't know that Skills had a tour around Princess Royal Island, like their Great Bear Challenge or something like that. And I did recognize the tent, so I figured, oh, there's not so many groups that are probably out here. This is very likely the Skills group. And I had met Heather on Rum Island, I think, camping a few months before that, and she had told me that she's on this trip, so that was quite fun, nice to kind of meet her there and chat with the Skills team. Even though it meant that we had to build an extra tent platform because everything else was occupied. So here I wanted to talk a little bit about food because of course this is a long trip. We went for 4 weeks. Like initially we thought we had 5 weeks, and then with all the before and plans and after and ferry, it ends up only being 28 days of actual kayaking time, which made it a bit more challenging to go out down the whole trip. But we also did a lot of dehydrating before, a lot of food preparation. We essentially had, we were prepared to potentially manage for the 4 weeks. But ideally pick up some food in Bella Bella. So we had essentially what I do for these kind of trips, I prepare or plan like a weekly menu, and then I just repeat this weekly menu every week. And then there is like lots of different things, like I dehydrate a lot of like chili and tomato pasta sauce, lentil coconut, like I ordered dehydrated coconut powder, and we have some soy granulate and things like that. And then we added some of the seaweed components into that. Ideally, we would have liked to put fish in, but we were absolutely terrible fisher people. None of us was ever fish, because usually we go with our husbands and they love fishing. So there was really not a reason for us to do it, and we really regretted that pretty terribly. Like we were actually supposed to at least bring a fishing rod, but the day we left, the fishing rod was nowhere to be found, so we didn't even have the fishing rod, and tried a little bit with a line, and like, no, it was bad. So no fishing for us, so that was rather disappointing, especially when the skills group showed up and said like, oh, it took us 5 minutes to get 3 salmon. Yeah, so that was sad. But the skills group also came and said, you won't believe what we saw today. We saw a spirit bear. So I was like, wow, where were you? We had planned one day to go in and see like one of those inlets and see if we can maybe find a spirit bear. So they told us where to go. But first of all, we had a beautiful night, and I actually like being out. I always have to go out at night. I always have to pee. That's just how life is. But sometimes it's just so beautiful that you can take out your camera at that occasion and take some nice pictures. And this is one of them, I think. And then the skills group was leaving that morning, so we took some pictures of them. And one of the funny things was that Justine Kergiven, like who many of you probably know, is one of the guides with skills, and has done lots of big trips. My friend Betsy, she's part of like a women's group in Germany, a women's kayaking group, and they had talked about like, well, how is she doing her business on the boat? So we had talked about that before, and I was kind of jokingly like, oh, I know they are somewhere here. Maybe we'll meet them, and you can ask her. And there we go. So we met her. So they talked about it, and she said, before she left, she said, okay, I'll demonstrate. So how you put the 2 boats together and step on the other boat, and then you can open your hatch in the back and do your business on the water. And Betsy actually tried a few times. It doesn't work with all dry suits, because you need to have a proper dry suit that you can actually fold back on. It doesn't help with the ones that only open at the front. But this was her underwater pit stop, and Heather should be on this somewhere. That's when they said goodbye, and we told them we'll take some nice pictures, and we also found their lost water bag, which I have since returned to JF. But then they also had told us go to Racy Inlet. That's where we saw the spirit bear, so we tried to go there as well, or we did go there. We had a little bit trouble landing because of the tide. I think we were at an awkward tide there. We didn't see any spirit bears, but we saw a beautiful waterfall that was definitely worth going there as well. And we tried to do a little bit of our fishing thing, and as I mentioned already, like it didn't work for us. But I since then bought a fishing rod, and I'm learning to fish. So next time. Another thing we did, we of course brought flour, so we made some bread on the sticks, and we did a lot of campfires, of course, out there, which is just beautiful. This is a little bit of an idea of our electronic arsenal that we had with us. We had several solar chargers that we took out as soon as the sun came out to recharge all the InReach GPS radios, cell phones, and whatever else we felt like charging. And because we had so much sun, we really didn't have any issues. Like we had power banks too that you can use when it's raining, but we actually didn't need it because it was just nice most of the time. we could dry our laundry. We did that frequently also. And of course, like we had to, like that particular island, Mill Island, doesn't have water, so we had to kind of paddle over to the other side, pick up water, but then we also could have a shower. The shower is actually another thing that I've really become to appreciate and take on any trip. Like you can pack them really small. You don't need a lot of water for this one. You can put in like, you put a liter of normal water and then you boil a little bit of water, add it to it, and you have your nice hot shower and can completely wash your hair and feel like new afterwards. So that's, and the shower packs like tiny, so totally recommendable. Then we went over to Kitasu Bay just for lunch. Like that would have been a nice place to camp as well, but it has a swing, so we all got a little turn on the swing, but then we continued on our way. And some thimbleberries, which were new to our German visitors too, so that was quite neat. In between Swindle and Price Island, there's a really beautiful channel. It just goes along quite a while, and we just went around and looked for little things to take pictures of. And of course, we did bear cache most of the time. We did, like, because we had like food for 4 weeks, we couldn't hang up all this food. So we really limited the food. This was smelly. We had a lot of beef jerky or other like dried meat components. So those were hang up. But we left all like the staples and stuff in the boats, and we didn't have any trouble with that. And this is a little bit summary of one morning packing activity. So this goes a little bit, but I'll keep it running. So you see all like the big stuffing as well. Like, I mean, the boats were, like 2 of our boats were fairly big, but my boat was actually, like we were a bit limited with the boats that we could take. So because like they didn't have their own boats. So for the length of the trip, like we definitely at the beginning had a hard time of getting everything packed. And I think at the first 1 or 2 days, it took us almost 3 hours from getting up to be in the water. But eventually we got it down to 1.5. So that was definitely nice. Just, and you see, like, when it's almost done, then everybody disappears in a different corner for a last pee, and then we can get going again. You see, actually, the pee towel here, that disappears, and gone it is. Almost there. And brushing the teeth, there you go. Oh. Last one to go. Okay. Well, I'm not showing that one person went back to pick up the camera. We did not leave the camera behind. Okay, so yeah. Then Swindle, at the south of Swindle Island, has a beautiful beach, which it didn't work out for us for the timing. And another thing we saw, of course, is lots of wolf tracks. Like any of those really beautiful sand beaches has quite beautiful wolf tracks, and I'll talk a bit more about wolves later on. Of course, picking up water again. And I think our next thing was Dallas Island, and that's like when we just started to have more and more beautiful campsites, and really appreciate being up there, because we got up pretty early, like around like 5:30, then kind of got up. We usually had our dry suits in the tent, so we kind of put them up already because it's cold at this time in the morning, then had breakfast, packed up, and then with light we started paddling, but then by around 1 o'clock or so we were at our destination, and then had a nice rest of the day off to enjoy. kelp queen. Like, yeah, Selma had never seen kelp before, so for her that was really amazing. So like that was just a really nice picture for her to kind of put that together. And then we were crossing Seaforth Channel again, finding a nice little place to have lunch. And as soon as we sat down, we heard the whales blow, and there we go. We had a pot of orcas coming by, which was very nice to just sit there in a beautiful sunshine, and there they come and pass us, which was just super nice. We didn't complain about that. And the other thing that came by was the Coast Guard vessel. They are often up there because they refill the lighthouses. And when we watched, they were just putting in the Zodiac in the water, and then the Zodiac was zooming off. So that was quite nice too, to watch that. We found another nice little place to stop, and Selma rescued a dragonfly, which then posed for us to take lots of pretty pictures of it. We also found a little mink who loved that beach, so we just sat there and took pictures of the mink. And then we were around the corner of Bella Bella. We decided not to actually paddle that way, but take a day trip to Bella Bella, then buy some food, and then come back. And we were just kind of getting ready to pack up, and then we heard the whales blowing again, and then we were escorted by a group of humpback whales, like almost all the way to Bella Bella, which was like here they were in the top right. They were actually bubble feeding here and then coming back out. They were fairly far away, so but yeah, it was just beautiful. They were like the whole time they were with us. That was quite special. And then they eventually turned off to the left, and we turned down to Bella Bella. This is the lighthouse at Bella Bella. And then, of course, in town, you can just land there. And we were fairly irritated at the beginning because there was still the COVID sign, don't enter the village. And we were like, what? So we asked somebody really, I was like, no, this is just old, just go ahead. So we were relieved and filled our tummies with lots of unhealthy food that we didn't have in a while, and lots of bright smiles. But then, of course, you also have to take a little walk through Bella Bella, especially the community hall is just beautiful. If you haven't been there yet, the colors are just amazing. Lots of totem poles in there to take pictures from, and even some indigenous written language signs, which I thought was quite nice. And here now I want to add a few pictures from a trip that I actually did in 2018 with my son. And the reason is that because the trip we did, like the 28th from Prince Rupert to Port Hardy, were a little bit fast-paced. So we were like, ideally I would have had like one more week where we could paddle the exactly same thing, but have like 7 days where we can just stay for a whole day and take pictures. I had a big camera with me, but like we were almost paddling, so I had hardly ever time to actually use the camera. But when I went on a trip with Finn, he's a kayak guide, so he went on this trip with Mom to just relax. So we had a super relaxing trip where with very short distances and lots of time for photography. So we both had camera equipment with us, and one of Finn's goals at the time was to see wolves, or to take a good picture of a wolf. On that particular campsite, like I got up in the morning, we had a fire in the evening, and I came outside, and I was like, oh, there's a dog. And I was like, no, there's no dogs here. This is a wolf. And Finn was still sleeping in his tent, so I called over. I was like, hey, Finn, if you want to take a picture of that wolf, you might want to come out now, because we have one in the campsite. So he just jumped out, and the wolf walked off. But then he turned at the end of the beach and came back and lay down, and not far away from us, and just stood there and we had telecameras, so it wasn't quite that close, but but still it was quite special. And it was also very special for us because like we had a white shepherd before that, like a beautiful dog, but she looked like a wolf. Her name was Amaruk, which is the word for white wolf. And like all the movements that she did when she was like laying down, sleeping, catching a fly, were exactly the same movements this wolf did. So when like every time she was sitting there and sleeping and she woke up, she would kind of go on her back, do like this. And then she would get up, shake, and then she would walk away. So it was very similar, and we had lost the dog, Amy, just Christmas before that, so we felt like, so it felt really quite special for us to kind of have this wolf visit and meet us, so yeah, that was quite special. The other thing, of course, are the cranes, and when I was with Finn, we ended up naming the beaches like Wolf Beach and Crane Beach and Mink Beach, and like all the animals that we would saw on these individual beaches. And this was one of the beach that we called Crane Beach, where they came and then just spent time there. Like at the beginning, we were kind of hiding behind the logs, trying to get closer, and then eventually we just stood there because they just came and fed on the algae on the ground and in the middle of our campsite, and then they flew away again. So yeah, so those were the cranes. And then eagles, of course, are also very nice. And this particular eagle, like this area, like is where out like just west of Bella Bella is this big island called Dufferin Island, and there's a few narrow channels that go through Dufferin Islands that are getting so narrow that with the tide they turn into rivers depending on if it's going up or down. You go in the right, and sometimes some regions even dry out, and you have to wait until you can pass. And for that particular one, we had to we had one where we had to wait and pass. But this eagle also knew that once the water is flowing again, all the fish will come, and they only can go through this tiny little hole. So he was waiting there, and he was extremely reluctant to leave there because it was his favorite spot. But unfortunately, we also wanted to go through. So eventually, he gave up and flew away. But he didn't fly far. So I hope that as soon as we passed, he came back and got his catch of the day. So from Bella Bella, we moved further back down. Like, so this is Dufferin Island. We didn't have time to go out here. This is Goose Island and McMullen Group. Those are just absolutely fantastic, beautiful islands, white beaches. It's like in a tropical island. I really wanted to go out, but like. Rightly so, Betsy was pushing, it's like, hey, if we want to go and make it to Port Hardy, we have to keep going. So I was like, But the easy thing for me is like, I can just come back. So it's all good. So yeah, we went further down here, and like each of those like colors is always one day. And then we went around Calvert Island, cross over to Cape Caution, around Cape Caution, down to Burnett Bay, and then back in almost one day back to Port Hardy. So that was the next day. So this was like, so twice or three times during the trip, we like put up all the maps what we still have to paddle, and that was the time when we had to make a decision, do we actually want to go all the way down to Port Hardy, or do we kind of rumble around there and just take the ferry back from Bella Bella? And eventually we decided, we're going to do it, we want to power through, so that's what we did. But then directly after that was an area where we had multiple marked sites on the charts, and none of them was campable at high tide. So we were really, like, we couldn't find anything. Eventually, this was the place where we, like, eventually just ended up stopping. It was the most terrible campsite of the whole trip. Like, yeah, it's... I was glad I was only myself in the tent and could find that one place where I maybe could put my mattress reasonably flat to sleep. The other two had a little bit more trouble because they had to put two mattresses in, and it was really not possible to find a place for a full tent that had flat ground. But it was only one place. And then after that, we came to Tricket Island, which was just absolutely beautiful. This one wasn't actually put, didn't even have a marker on, but it looked from the chart, like it looked like sand bay, so it's like, let's try it out, and it was just gorgeous. And there were actually high back camps in there as well, so which was really nice. Of course, there we had a lot of looking around, sitting in the sun, enjoying the view. I had to take this marker for my husband because he's a survey engineer, and but from there you could actually look over and see in the shades Calvert Island, which is or across Hackey Passage, and yeah, of course, more birds and beautiful sunsets, of course. So after we crossed Hackay Passage, like you arrived, there's the Hackay Fishing Club, and that one has like this beautiful wood-made bridge, and Selma is a carpenter, so she really appreciated that woodwork there. But of course, there's also nice sandy beach. And if you have ever been on northern Calvert Island, this is a really good place to get stuck when a storm blows in. And we actually had thought about staying one more day at that beautiful island on the other side, but we had the storm forecast coming in where we knew that we would probably be stuck for a few days. So we decided, okay, let's cross Hackay Passage, and then we ended up on North Beach. Because in this region, there is supposed to be all these beautiful beaches, and they're all connected, so you can kind of hike from one beach to the next beach to the next beach and the next beach, and I think there's 7 or something like that in the end. So we definitely used that, and we were stuck there for 3 days until the winds calmed down a little bit. That was also when we actually had rain, so we definitely needed our tarp. Waiting out the storm. There was a little pond, and we thought, oh, that'd be a great place to clean our dry suits. It made for a fun picture, but it was really muddy, so it didn't really clean. Got maybe the salt out, but you got dirt instead on your dry suit. So yeah, it wasn't a perfect situation. But lots of berries on the whole trip. We had like many mornings with huckleberries for breakfast in the muesli. This one had like lots of these lakes with lilies and other things too. I mean, that's, if you have actually 3 days, then you can take pictures a lot. And that's actually something I wanted to mention with the wolves, is that like I've seen lots of wolves kayaking, but never by just arriving there and then leaving the next day. I've only ever seen wolves when I was at one place multiple days. And you know that the wolves see you long before you see them. So they come, check you out, and then eventually they might decide that you can see them, and then they will come. So that's why we didn't actually see anything on that trip, because we only had a few places where we stayed more than one night. Also like flesh-eating sandu, beautiful to look at, beautiful to take picture, bright red colors. And you can hike to the summit, look out on Calvert Island, which is really beautiful. There's another little lily pad lake. Pictures of wimballs and sandpipers, lots of those little sandpipers. If there's nothing else to take pictures, you can take hours taking pictures of dunlins. Lots of tracks again, wolf tracks, crane tracks. And that's also a nice thing I tend to do, is there's so many places where you have like endless abalone shells. So you spend a little time meandering the beach and collecting them shells, and then you can make a nice mural out of those. So that was our artwork for northern Calvert Island. So we decided then to go the outer side of Calvert Island, and that was, of course, after the storm. So there was still a little bit of swell going on. So it was, and we saw a lot of the foam stuff that you have after the storm, all like algae protein, nicely whipped up in a nice topping. And it doesn't really look as bad here, and I actually like paddling in swell, because it's really like the waves are really long, and they actually don't bother you. You just disappear, and your friends disappear, and then they show up again, and only when you get closer to the coast, that's when it starts to get a little bit iffy, when you kind of get the reflecting waves back and it turns into something else. And I had heard that people get seasick in kayaks, but I hadn't actually seen someone do so. But once we were like pretty close to like one of the next bigger campsites, Selma started to feel really bad. And then Betsy tried to help her, and then she got seasick also. And then we arrived at the beach, and they were like, I think, sick for an hour or something until they recovered. And then we decided, okay, we're just going to call it a day. And this beach is really way too beautiful anyway to sit there. Oh, I had like one little movie going. There was sound with this particular one because she was so excited about paddling in that foam. That was before she got seasick. Yeah, and this is like the outer coast, one of those campsites, just again, beautiful sandy beach, waves coming in, like it's a bit tricky to land sometimes, and I actually did like a terrible landing there, which something where it like looked really like you can just do it and nicely go on the beach. But what I didn't notice is that it had kind of washed out under that, and when I stepped in, like I stumbled. But you can't really allow yourself to stumble when you get out on a surf beach, because then the next wave comes and takes your boat. So my boat went over, and every time I wanted to get up, the boat hit me and I fell over again. So I had a lot of work to clean my boat out. Like, it wasn't really a dangerous situation. It was more like an annoying situation, but yeah, like, it could have been avoided by just going a little bit to the side, but oh well. We always know better afterwards. Yeah, I like taking pictures of waves. It's just, especially if it's sunny and you can see the light through it. It's beautiful. Yeah, and the nice thing here is, like, when you're with 3 women, it's no problem to actually have like a nude session in the afternoon when it's so bright and warm and sunny. And we all have like these little purple towels and like these little purple things, and those are all pee towels. So I'm just saying that because it's I've been using those for a while, both in the mountains as well as in kayaking, because it really saves on toilet paper, and toilet paper that ends up being in the ocean. The ocean is probably faster in dealing with it, but in the mountains it's just terrible to walk somewhere and there's like flying toilet paper and like little trees. It's just horrible. So this works really well. So yeah, we had our nice little afternoon. And the funny thing was that, like, once we were luckily all dressed again, a helicopter came by and flew really close over us. And we were just like, well, aren't we glad that we're all back on clothes again? I think that there is some tourist flights going over Calvert Island, and that's what it was. So it was would have been an extra funny occasion for them. Anyway, we did have a watcher, but that one we weren't quite bothered so much about. And then, of course, the next day we had a really long day because we were trying to get as close as possible to Cape Caution, because we had a wind forecast coming in again. We had 2 more days of like reasonably calm, and then the next wind was coming in. So early morning start. And then just with the first light, we were on the water. And then we paddled all across the channel between Calvert Island and the mainland. But then it was still pretty nice, and we decided we're going to try to paddle all the way to Table Island, which is probably rarely reached, because it's like you usually get there and try to get past Cape Caution. And we had this one day, and we really, like, it was a bit rough to get there because like around Cape Caution, and the problem why Cape Caution is so difficult is because there's a couple of currents that come against each other, and around Cape Caution it's really shallow, so you have like currents from different directions, very shallow area, and of course that means nasty waves. So it was pretty difficult to get to Table Island, and we were back in fog at that time, and I was navigating with GPS, and my GPS was running out of battery, so it was kind of telling me, like, your battery is low, and we didn't see the island yet. It was foggy, and the waves were kind of 2 meters high at that point, so it was a bit of a challenge, but then we kind of turned into Table Island, like in there, like where you see here. This is the time outside that area. There's big waves, but you come in, it's totally sheltered, and you completely arrive in paradise. It's just like this beautiful mossy area, flat and soft for camping, or you can camp on the rock beach, very flat and covered with sea otters. So like there's sea otters everywhere, just like big groups, like tumbling around each other, like big floats, and if they do notice you because you get up too high, they all disappear and run away. But yeah, that was pretty beautiful. And next morning we left again. Like, we had all these nice logs that you could use to help your kayak to slide back into the water. And then we had the calmest passage around Cape Caution. It was just like it was really flat calm, like at the point where Cape Caution is. There were 4 sea lions sleeping, and I paddled toward them, so I woke them up, and they all disappeared. And unfortunately, nobody had a camera, but it was so cool, and we were just laughing. So we stopped and had chocolate at Cape Caution, and then continued on to Burnett Bay. And Burnett Bay also is just an attraction because it's this huge, long, sandy beach. It's just It's just amazing. Here you see, like, it's just beach, beach, beach. But also very exposed, so you really need to, like, the nice thing with a beach that is really long and has like different edges to go in, like you can see like which way the waves are coming and then sneak in the way which are least affected by the surf. So where we went, it was just nice. You could just go around the corner and then it was almost no waves to get in. There is a little lagoon go in, and there was like this dead tree, and like to me it almost looked like one of these Rodin sculptures, so it was kind of funny. But in that area was like covered with sea asparagus, so we harvested sea asparagus. But it also meant like we actually went back all that way because we were looking for water. And it was all salty, so we couldn't drink it. But eventually we heard like this little trickling, and so Selma had to climb under a tree in the roots, and that's where the water trickled down, and we could collect it and have our dinner. Some more birds visiting. And then we continued on further south, and the idea was kind of to stop somewhere in between like God's Pocket and Port Hardy. And but we had another storm warning coming in, so we stopped here for lunch at Tinson Island, and then this is the crossing over to God's Pocket. And there's this, or the Deserta Islands, like that's the first group of islands. So we went there, but the only campsite that was looked at, we didn't like it. It was it was again one of those grassy places with lots of rocks under it. So we decided, oh, we'll just move on and paddle on towards God's Pocket. But then we ended up, the wind was picking up and we knew the storm was coming the next day. It's like, okay, we can just push on for a little bit today and then be back in the car at home when the storm comes, or we can hang in there and then we don't even know if we get away. So we ended up, since Jens and Betsy and Selma had a plane to catch, a few days later we decided be the safer move. So last one is Masterman Island, which is just around the corner from Port Hardy. It's like 6 kilometers off. So we camped there overnight and then back into Port Hardy. So yeah, the stats are like 3 women, 28 days, 650 kilometer. The longest day was 52 kilometer. The shortest day was 6 kilometer. Oh, and the other thing I didn't mention that, like when we started out, like my friend Betsy told me, oh, I heard somebody say that if you gain weight, it's a vacation. If you lose weight, it's an expedition. So we said, like, okay, let's weigh ourselves before and then do the stats after. And this is the challenge. It's like we all lost weight, so we call it an expedition. But nonetheless, our key question is, when can we go again? Yeah, so that's good.
Questions? And everybody stay seated after the presentation. We have a special thing that's going to happen, and you'll find out. Okay, so questions?
I have a question. You took 28 days, and you said you had to go quickly. What would you think to do if you were to do that trip again? How long would you like to take?
Well, if I would do exactly that trip, I would probably add 1 week. Yeah. I didn't mind the paddling that we did, even the 2 day. Like we had 2 days that were over 50 kilometers. Those were long days. But like you can do that once, especially if it means then you have a day off where you can stay. But if you would do that exact same thing and then just have 7 days where you could just like have an extra day to sit and hang, that would be nice. Yeah. And the other thing is also that we were actually really lucky weather-wise. Yes, we had a few, like the storm before, like on Calvert Island, and then a few rougher afternoons, but we didn't really have bad weather. So if we would have had bad weather and had more of those like 3 or 4 days, like we wouldn't have managed to go down. So yeah, I would probably add a week, like ideally as like fun, relaxed days, but in emergency, just like weather backups. Yeah.
Apart from the skills group, did you see anybody else among the did you see anybody else?
We saw at the beginning, like where I indicated that we were at the same place, like there was another group that came with us on the ferry, and because the camping is so limited, even though we didn't see them paddling all day because they were up early and we weren't, we always ended up at the same campsite until we purposefully stayed an extra day because like we want to be alone on the beach. So we saw those people. That was like a couple with their daughter, and then we saw two men coming in the other direction, somewhere right in the middle. That's it. Like the skills group, that family, and those two people. We didn't see anyone else. Yeah, very small. Yeah.
What time of year was that?
That was August.
August?
Yeah. Yeah. And July, August is probably like, but if you take it too light, that's when like end of August, early September, that's when your major wind direction shifts from northwest to southeast. Northwest means nice weather and sunshine. Southeast means nasty weather. So that's also when people actually do it later. It's more recommended to go from Port Hardy to Prince Rupert, while in the summertime you want to go from Prince Rupert to Port Hardy because your predominant wind direction is from the northwest. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I have two questions. The first question is, I'm a little curious about what paths you and your group commanders used for this trip. My second question is just a kind of side question. I know you are an A-lead researcher. So I'm a little curious about what you are doing in your daily work. Like, can you please very briefly describe what are you doing in your day-to-day work?
Okay, your first question, the boats we were using, we all had valley boats. One Aquanaut, which is an older model that's not built anymore, but it's a beautiful boat. It's very slick, it's very fast and comfortable. We all wanted to have skeg boats. We're all fairly comfortable in the water or underwater. and Valley Etain 17.7, that was the plastic boat that was really big. Betsy was paddling that, so she wasn't super happy because it was a little bit more like, it wasn't quite as slick and fast, but she was the strongest paddler, so she had to take that. And I had an Etain 17.1, which is a bit too small, I would say, for that trip. I would have preferred like a 17.5 probably for that trip. Yeah. And for my personal work, I'm an oceanographer by training. I do climate model development. I work with fisheries and oceans. And my work, like I'm particularly looking at climate change impacts on marine ecosystems in the Arctic. So I work with Inuit communities and try to communicate how climate model downscaling can help with understanding how climate change might impact subsistence fisheries.
Okay,
That's in a band box. Anything else? Good. Oops.
Be ashamed to break a leg after all that paddling, wouldn't it?
Yeah.